Hi and welcome, Sophie here. So today I have something a little different for my channel. Consider this a little plug for my Patreon. So I have started doing weekly videos in this style, 1 hour videos where I talk through my entire creative process. It's part tutorial and me sharing how I use different grease pencil tools, and also part random chattiness about art and creativity. So this month's theme is grease pencil materials, and so each week I explain a different type of grease pencil material and how I would use them. And so in each video, I make a whole painting in 1 hour with just that one material. And so today, I hope you'll join me in this journey of making a 1 hour painting using just a gradient material. And if you would like to become a patron, you'll get access to more videos like this, as well as blend file downloads for these Create With Me videos and much more. So yeah, I really appreciate your support, whatever that is, however that shows up. Thank you so much for just being here. I really appreciate that, and I hope that you enjoy painting with me. Okay, hi, welcome. So this is another standalone 1 hour Create With Me. We're gonna be drawing this little frog from start to finish in 1 hour. However much we get done, that's fine, because the point of this video is to talk about another grease pencil type of material, specifically gradients. This is possibly the video that I'm most excited for, the material that I'm most excited to talk about, my personal favorite. So another free to use frog image from pexels.com. Thank you to this creator for sharing it. The image will also be linked in the description, places you can find it. So I've just dragged it right into, this is my pureref file, which will also be linked. It's what I always use to display my reference images. And I'm just gonna get started right in my default 2D animation starter file. So I have, the focus of this video specifically is not to talk about like settings or shortcuts or how I set up my file, unfortunately, because that would fill up so much of this video if I tried. So feel free to download my starter blend file to follow along with me. And I also have made other videos about the shortcuts that I've changed, the keys that I've changed. So I will just dive in, focusing on the material for this video. So I do have in my default starter 2D animation file gradient material types that I've already made. 5 versions specifically, but I'm going to be making a new one so that we can make it together and go through that process. So new material, a gradient. Okay, I'm just thinking. So often when I use gradient fill materials, I use them combined with the stroke part of the material. But I think in the spirit of trying to make a painting, seeing what we can do with just using a single material type, I'm actually going to remove the stroke part of the material for this and have it be just a fill material. I might regret this later. I will change the style to solid. And so if we have a look at that in draw mode, so by default I've opened up into color attribute mode here, previously named vertex paint mode, not material paint mode. So just make sure you're in this mode as well. You can access that here. You can also access it here with these buttons right here. So it's this option. So if I draw a stroke, we pretty much are seeing the gradient that, you know, by default a gradient material type is set with. So it goes from a black base color to a white color. And this blend value has to do with how much the vertex colors, the color attributes, are affecting it. So it's at 0.5 currently by default, which means that, you know, it's half affecting it. So just to show you, if I lower this to 0, now the gradient looks a lot more as you might expect, really going from this pure black to this pure white with a gradient in between. And if I raise the blend value all the way up to 1, we have lost the gradient altogether. Oh no, except for, I personally prefer, much prefer to use color attributes and vertex colors as opposed to using material colors. That just works a lot better for me personally. And so the way that I set up gradients is I don't need to touch the first base color at all. I'll just leave it at that. And the secondary color, I also don't need to change the color because, again, the colors don't show up at all. I'm totally using vertex colors. And so it's the alpha value here, the alpha value slider, that I want to lower all the way down to 0. So what this has done, this has given us a gradient that is fully affected by whichever vertex color we choose. It is that color 100%. And also, it is a gradient that fades from full opacity to full transparency. So you can see as I'm layering these on top of one another, that is something that I find so exciting about this material type, this gradient material, is being able to layer colors on top of one another in this way, being able to draw very big strokes of color, and to be able to layer them. So some other things that I like to do for my personal way of setting up these gradient materials, I'll go into edit mode, A to select everything, and X to delete them, and I'll just delete all the strokes. Back into draw mode. So I'm gonna do some test strokes just so we can see how the gradient will show up in different stroke orientations. So some good ones that I like to test out are if I do like a square that goes from top to bottom and then I complete it, a square that goes from left to right and then I complete it, and then also some curves, a curve similarly that goes up to down, and then a curve that goes left to right. So if I turn on the stroke, you can just see the shapes that I've drawn. So this is how the gradient looks currently. This is the shape of the gradient. So if you've noticed, what all of these strokes that I just made had in common is that the dark part of the gradient, the opaque part of the gradient, is at the start of the stroke, and then it fades out to nothingness. So I don't find this a personally useful approach for gradients. I prefer to do the exact opposite. And so there are multiple ways that I could achieve this. I could change the rotation value to 180. That would flip the colors, or I could also press the flip colors button right here, which is perfect. So this is how I like to have my gradients looking. And so now I can just modify them a bit more, and I'll explain once I do the settings exactly why I just did this. So the location X value, if I test that out, we can see that this is actually changing where the gradient is located. If we look at this stroke, for example, you can pretty much see like the line where the opaque meets the light, or like the diminishing part of the gradient. It kind of creates a line where it goes from fully opaque to starting to get more transparent. So we can see that that's being moved with the X location value. The Y location value is not doing anything. It's pretty much just like moving the stroke this way and that way, but unless we had a rotation value other than 0, then the Y would affect that, but I think that's really complicated, and so I'd rather just keep the rotation value to 0 and only have to worry about moving one location value, which is the X. So the way that I would do this is I would get it something like this. Do I want to modify the scale? Just to show you what the scale does, it basically reduces the transition area distance. So, I mean, I think you can see it on my screen. The lower the scale value, the more quickly it will go from light to dark, or like opaque to transparent from one end of the gradient to the other. And at a scale value of 0, it's just no gradient whatsoever. So by default, it was a scale value of 1, I think. Or was it 0.5? No, okay. So I'm gonna go, and this is kind of just based on feeling, based on my own experience using gradient fills, with 0.8 8 for both the Y and X scale values. I have a good feeling from that. Did I even need to modify the Y scale value? No, the Y scale value did nothing apparently. I'm just so used to modifying both scale values at the same time. So that's what I did by holding on one of the scale values, dragging down, and then I could modify both of them. I'm just so used to doing that, but in reality, the Y scale value can be anything, but apparently not 0. Apparently that still messes it up. Do I know why? Nope. But I think I'm pretty happy with this scale value. So now I'm going to kind of explain the mindset behind why I did this. And I'm going to start painting too, because time is already going by so quickly. So I personally find that setting up the gradient in this way, so that, again, I'm going to turn on the stroke just to illustrate what I'm doing. So the start of the stroke, the start of any stroke that I make from the initial distance is pretty much empty space. And actually that's quite a bit of empty space now that I see it with this stroke. So I think I will, now that I've modified the scale, I'll modify the X location value again, because basically what I want to avoid this harsh line, which shows up when I draw a stroke. And instead I want the very start of these U shapes or these square shapes. I want the very start of these strokes to be pretty much nothing, but also like earlier we had a lot of just empty space like this. So I want the color, the gradient transition to be just starting without seeing this line. And so as you can see, I'm able to get different shades, different opacities based on the size of the stroke that I make. So of course here, like I made a big shape, a big stroke, and the gradient is filling up all of that. But I can also control this and use this to my advantage. For example, if I draw a small shape like this, I know that the gradient will show up really, really light and it will not have much of an impact. And then if I want to start getting into darker gradients, having darker parts of the gradients, but I want this shape to still be small like this, then what I can do is something like this. And then as I work my way up the scale, I'm able to get darker and darker gradients, darker and darker opacities. So, you know, I think it's fair to look at an approach like this and say, that seems overly complicated. Why would you do that when you can just use other methods? And I'm not going to say that this is the most efficient or easy to use method, but like genuinely for me personally, I have used gradients a lot and I find this a fun approach and I enjoy using it, and I even enjoy making like strokes like this. And if I turn on the stroke, you could kind of see that's what they'll look like. And also I rarely ever go to this dark area, this dark like gradient like this. I'll often stick around here or here, just different ways to get different opacities for the same gradient. But yeah, I'm not here to say what is the most efficient or effective way of working. I'm just here to present one way of working, and a way that I personally particularly very much enjoy and find fun. And it has come in handy for me quite a bit. I think gradient materials are really powerful, so let's just start drawing with them and I'll see what I can get. Okay, I thought about it some more, and I feel like it would be helpful to start with a darker paper texture background color than a light paper texture background color, just due to the nature of this image, the fact that it is on a dark background. I want to give us that head start. So I found this image in my folder of paper textures that I long ago saved a bunch from Pixabay. edit it. I just want to crop. I feel like this is kind of a nice area. We can't see it anymore. This is like a nice area that I think would make for a really nice paper texture for this image. Cool, so then I will plug that into the World Properties tab where I have my paper texture all set up. And then I am also going to change my canvas size this time around so that it's more horizontal and actually matches the image that I just created. So I'm pretty happy with how this is looking. I'm a bit thrown off by all of the repeating background paper textures. So I think I'll go to my camera in the object mode, and I'm gonna change the passe-partout, make it darker, just so that I mostly see my canvas. All right, cool. I'm pretty happy with this. I'm excited to start painting, and I'm excited to start using my gradient material. So I'm going to start using this material to block in colors that I see in the reference image really roughly. So if you watched the previous video that I made this month, you'll know that this is like already a very different approach that we're taking. Not even starting with a sketch, just getting full into the blocking in some big shapes of this frog. But one thing that I talked about in the last video definitely still applies here, if not like even more so here. So I'm pretty much just picking colors from the whole grease pencil color palette. I'm not thinking too much about a color palette or about any one specific color that I pick. Really what I'm thinking about at this point is just layering colors on top of one another and using the gradient, using the transition and the transparency to get the colors overall like closer to how they look in the reference image, rather than trying to get one perfect color or even one perfect shape. To just slowly build up a piece and to slowly find the proportions and to slowly find the right colors. So this is gonna be quite a journey that we are gonna go on together. I can already tell. I was so excited for this video, but I must say I'm so used to using materials in combination with each other, like using a stroke with this. So giving myself the challenge of not having that, which again, I very much might come to regret in time. We shall see. It really is a totally different mindset and a totally different approach. But I think that can be really fun to do at times. And also, like, the result of this, really, there are no stakes whatsoever. And I feel like that's a good approach to have when doing a practice piece, like a test piece. Like, really, the whole point of this video, the whole point of this learning session is to learn about a material, to get comfortable using it, and also maybe also for me, in this case, me who's used this material quite a bit, giving myself the challenge of making a piece of art with only this material and seeing kind of the way that that changes my usual approach and challenges me. I feel like the stakes are a bit high for me, because if this doesn't look good and I'm still gonna try to make a video about this, that's a bit embarrassing to put out there. But for you watching along, the stakes are so low. There are no stakes, and I really recommend having that kind of approach, ideally with art in general, but I know that's not always possible, especially for like client work, commission work. It's not always possible to have no stakes. But at least for practice pieces, I really want to encourage to just create and feel free, and also keep in mind that the whole point, especially if like try to set out with an intention in mind, like an intention of learning something, especially if it is a practice piece, whether that's learning proportions, learning anatomy, learning a tool, learning a software. My only goal for this painting is to see what I could do using just a gradient material, which has been a long time since I've done this. Now that I'm fully in it, I'm realizing how long it's been since I've done this. So I think this is also a good for me, it's a good like humbling and teaching experience too, that like you can find a piece out of a really, really rough start. Kind of a reminder that like everything is fixable, and if I'm not liking something at the start, or if I'm going through periods of doubt of a piece, like I'm currently very much experiencing, I can still trust in the process and have faith that I will figure it out. And I do feel like there's a balance to be struck here, in the sense that I also think sometimes like I'm all for restarting and giving up if something just isn't working. And so, but I would recommend, if you want to get a piece to work, to maybe set aside an amount of time that you're gonna try to work on it, try to make it work. And so I basically myself, I have an hour to get something nice with this piece. I believe that I will be able to. I'm trying to think of what kinds of things that I can talk about material specific, also to help anyone who's unfortunately following along with me. I know I haven't been talking too much about what I've been doing with the strokes and with the materials. I mean, I really am doing the kinds of things that I talked about at the start of the video with how the materials work. I'm making long strokes to get the fill material, the grading material, darker. And that's why you're seeing some of these lines here, which is a look. It's certainly a look. But I am keeping in mind that those eyes, I'm drawing the eye right now, that those lines, they can be covered up later. And so through necessity of that, of like kind of working inward and then working my way outward, with the mindset that as I work my way outward, I can erase, or I can like paint over some of these lines which were necessary in order to get the gradient to look darker. That's a different experience for me as well. It's forcing me to work inward and work my way outward. I think it's honestly, like, just personally, I think it's a fun challenge to give yourself to something like this, like using a single material for better or for worse. I hope anyways that it will give you a good handle on the material, an understanding of it. And again, I would not use only this material for any kind of real piece, official piece, personal piece, anything other than a test piece, I would absolutely use it in combination with other materials. And by the way, I have made other live create with me's with that in mind, using all of the different types of materials in conjunction with one another, as I would typically do in my process. But this is just the theme for this month. And honestly, I don't hate what I have so far. High praise, I know. I don't hate it. I think the proportions could use work though, and I have not been sketching. So, you know, it is what it is. In terms of proportions, I was not sketching. I did not make a sketch. So I'm gonna flip my canvas. If you're using my default starter animation 2D, yeah, you can flip the canvas with the left and right arrow keys. Otherwise, I'll link the way that you can set that up. And so another thing that you're seeing me do now is I'll use the gradient to outline the frog, the shape of the frog, with a dark color, because the background is quite dark. And so what we're getting over time is this kind of gradient where the darkest parts of the background color are like immediately surrounding the frog. I'm pretty happy with this. I think I'm gonna work on, let's see if I can modify the proportions in sculpt mode as I would typically do. So if I'll go directly into sculpt mode, and I want to just sculpt the piece as a whole. So up here, I can turn off any kind of selection mask. And then I'll also want to turn off the overlays here. Make sure the overlays here are turned off so that I can see my piece as a whole unobstructed by the geometry. And so I'm just gonna work on, I'm gonna use the push tool here. I can use F to resize it. I just want to make this eye specifically, and also this front of the face, a bit less narrow. Cool. I'm definitely going to keep figuring out the proportions and placement of stuff as I work, as I paint. I'm not mad about this. I'm going to take a 5-minute break now. I recommend you do as well, but there's going to be a timestamp if you don't want to, but I do recommend taking a 5-minute break to just, if anything, just look away from your screen for a few seconds. I tend to do this on my breaks. I had one last thing I wanted to do. Ah, yes, I wanted to, oh yeah, I should save that. I should indeed save this. That's a good idea. Okay, now that it's saved, I'm looking at it on my small screen because like the OBS where I'm filming is over there. So I'm looking at it on a small scale. I like it a lot. I'm proud. Proud moment. And we still have another half hour. So proud. Okay, so I just want to show you quickly like the proportion change that I did and how I check the before and after personally, how I toggle that. So make sure to save before you do this because this is a dangerous thing we're about to do. If you go into edit, you can access your undo history. The number of undo states is defined by you in the preferences. I have mine set to, I think I checked it was 32. This is like fine for me. It's a good amount. So I'll go back all the way. So all these stroke sculpts are all of the editing I did in sculpt mode of the proportions. So if I go back to here, radial control, that was changing the brush size. So I can compare the proportions, and I definitely think I succeeded in just opening up the face, widening the face. It was way too like narrow and like bullet shaped before and pinched. So I think this is a great change. And yes, just to say, the reason that I mentioned that this is dangerous and that you should save before you do this is because like while you, like I'm going back and forth to different undo states to see the changes that I made. But if I go back here and if I do like almost any action, such as like pressing, I'm pretty sure that counted. That counted. If I change modes, that counts as an undo state. And so all of my progress, like, I just lost all of that because I went back in time. So I recommend always saving before you check that, because now I can just reopen. Don't save. Reopen, and we have our beautiful, our beauty. Okay. See you very soon. All right, hi, we're back. Let's just keep going with this ridiculous experiment. I will keep working with my canvas flipped for a little while. I also realized I never mentioned, but in order to flip an image in pureref, it's basically just hold Shift and Alt and drag in whatever direction you want. So just a useful shortcut to have if you also use pureref to display your reference images. I will say this definitely takes me back to when I used to use gradient fills a lot more like this. And this is something I've done in the past, just make paintings with gradient fills like this as like daily paintings, kind of like just paintings to practice my skills and to challenge myself. And it is something I do quite enjoy. And like I was saying, I'm pretty happy with the result already, and I'm excited to see how far I can take it. One thing I want to pay attention to, since I know that I'm pretty much only going to do another half hour on this, and it has already started, is I would like to make sure that I get the entire frog. Like, I've done a lot of work on the face, which I think is totally fine, and I'm pretty happy with the results of that. But I want to make sure that I don't like just render the face and leave the rest of the piece untouched completely. Like, the rest of the piece is definitely going to be a lot less finished and rendered than the face. The face is definitely like, it's the focal point. It's definitely going to be the part of this piece that is the most rendered and painterly and painted. But I at least want to like indicate the rest of the body. So I want to make sure to, if I start with that, that should be good. So working on the shape of the frog, basically like I'm working on the shape of the frog, like the outline, essentially by like digging into it with the dark color, like gradient fills dark color, and like using the negative space around the body to carve the outline of the frog and the shape, which I think is pretty cool, and that too is a fun thing to experiment with. And I'm glad this is having me try that out and also share that with you on camera. That is definitely something I like about painting in general, and especially painting with grease pencil, is being able to do like both, like, you know, dig into a shape with like this. I can dig into a shape and then I can also go and make it bigger like this. Like, I can do that kind of thing. I can do both. I can do it all. And through a combination of different approaches, I think I often arrive at something that I like quite a bit. And it's cool to be able to share different approaches even in this video, this experiment of using just a single material type too. So something that you may have picked up on if you're watching me closely, I don't know, if you're following along yourself, maybe it's not something that noticeable, but I do undo a lot, especially with like a material like this, which like, as I draw the stroke, I have no idea what it's gonna look like until I actually release my stylus and then the stroke appears, and only then am I able to evaluate whether or not I think that's an effective stroke in terms of the strength of the gradient and the color that I chose. So I definitely do like just like I'd prefer to work, especially with a material like this, with a mindset of just kind of like drawing strokes and getting stuff down, and then if ever it's not right, absolutely nothing wrong with undoing and redoing. Because anyways, I can't know what the stroke looks like until it's down. Like I mentioned, I do try as well to fix by like painting over with other strokes, other colors, and building up a painting. And so at the same time, no one stroke needs to be perfect, and I do like to keep that in mind as well. But still, sometimes I draw a stroke and it's just like, ooh, really not what I wanted, really not what I had in mind. And totally, I feel free to undo, redo a lot, so I encourage you to do that as well if that's something that you want to do. There's no cheating in art. There's no cheating. And definitely making use of the tools that you have, like the undo tool, the undo redo tool. I think that is awesome. Ooh, I like how this is looking. I like it a lot. I've definitely gone like very noodly with this back arm in my drawing. Yeah, definitely having not made a sketch at all. That is like its own beast altogether, just painting straight up without any kind of sketch. That was not my plan for this video, but then I decided at the last minute that I would just use a gradient material without a stroke. I was originally planning on using a stroke as well. So yeah, just using a gradient material without a stroke, that pretty much eliminated my option to sketch. So that is why. So that too is another interesting challenge. Not definitely like for any kind of official piece or personal piece or like anything longer than a sketch, I would absolutely sketch. Plan it out first before I went in with fills and gradients and colors, but I think this is pretty fun as well. And I guess just the thing to keep in mind with this kind of approach of not even having done a sketch is like, you know, the main thing that's going to suffer from this approach, I think, is the proportions. So yeah, just kind of knowing that and trying to embrace that, I think is important, because I think I could still get really cool colors and designs and textures, ingredients, and all of that without needing to do a sketch first, but definitely some of the proportions and the way that things look, it might be a bit wonky, and you know, just embracing that for this sketch. I don't know what this frog is resting on, but it makes me think of a stalk of rhubarb, which I love. I grew up eating just like raw rhubarb stalks, dipped in brown sugar, which of course made it good because it was just like a sugar stick. But I really like the reds of this plant, whatever it is that it's on, and I really like the reds of the frog in general. I mean, the body is a bit more like green, yellow, orange red, but it's still, I find, a lot more red than it is like purely green, which is pretty interesting. Yeah, I really want to get back to the face, but I'm like really forcing myself to at least get some indication of the rest of the piece. Oh my gosh, I don't know if you're seeing me. I'm listening to the album Punch by Autoheart, and the Sailor song just came on, and apparently I cannot listen to that song and not move, so I am totally bopping here. One of my favorite bands, I think, a discovery of last year. Just such fun and like bouncy and happy music. Even when some of the songs are kind of dark and sad, the music is just always so much fun to move along to. Okay, I'm going really loose with the back part of the frog, which I think is totally fine. Like, I just want to do some indications here. I think that's a pretty cool thing that can be taught with doing quick sketches like this, or like timed pieces, and having giving yourself an amount of time that you're going to work on a piece, because I do feel like, at least for me anyways, it helps me to learn to prioritize. And this is just something that I've gotten used to over time of doing a lot of quick sketches, but you know, knowing that I need to make some time for the hind of the body if I want to include it at all, because if I don't devote some time to it, then it will just not get done. But also learning like finding the balance of like how to find some details indicated in some small ways without needing to go spend too much time on it, and how can you still have something that looks believable even if it's not realistic. Wow, this time is going fast. Wowza. I think I'm gonna flip my canvas again to get a different perspective on my piece. I always like to say, as a rule of thumb, of like, when should you flip your canvas? Literally any time you think of it. Like, oh, maybe I should flip it. Yeah, do it. There's nothing, as far as I'm concerned, there's no downside to flipping your canvas. And if anything, the more frequently that you get like a fresh perspective on your piece and you see it in a new light, which I believe is what flipping your canvas gives you. It gives you a new perspective on your piece. I really think that the more often you do that, the better off you are. At least that's my experience. So yeah, I have, like I mentioned, I have it's set up to flip my canvas with just like a left and right arrow keys, which is super useful, especially like this, doing still images that have no animation. So I basically just use the timeline and the first 2 frames of the timeline to flip my canvas. That's what the left and right arrow keys do. They toggle between keyframes. So I'm still pretty happy with this. Okay, I'll give this back branch a bit of a gradient too. Just so, like, this edge here, this like transition from the light to the dark down here, this was like really intense. So I'm just kind of softening that transition with a gradient so that the darkness of the background blends into the darkness of the stick. And actually what I'm noticing, this top is a lot lighter than the bottoms, and maybe I could do the opposite with the top, is like use a light gradient to blend the top of the stick into the background that way with the lights. So I think that's pretty interesting. Maybe I'll even use kind of like a blue-green color to fade it into the background a little bit. So I think that's pretty interesting. Okay. Okay. Time stress. So I'm gonna focus on now. First, on getting all of these fingers, all of these details in just very loosely. I'm using my trick earlier to like start a stroke far off and then to get the gradient to be pretty dark there. And I'm also making use of the fact that this, this piece of plant has kind of these striations in it, these lines, so that these sort of lines don't look too out of place, that I'm doing to get the gradient to look lighter. So that's pretty interesting. It's all about making the tools work for you. Finding creative problem-solving strategies. Of course, this is a problem that we gave ourselves because we we decided to use only this gradient material, but I still think that's fun. Okay, now to outline the fingers, and then I'm already feeling pretty strong about this. Like, I'm feeling like these are pretty strong. These are just bare bone indications of the fingers, but I think that's enough. Getting a bit more gradient transitions here to the front of the body, because now I really want to start rendering the front of the body a bit more. Another really fun song is playing. This one is Moscow by Autoheart. Another wonderful boppy song. All of their songs practically are just like so much fun, but Moscow and the Sailor song are just especially wonderful songs. So I did also save my file after the first half hour that I did. So that's gonna be fun. Fun in like a nervous way to see the progress that I made in the first half hour, or really the first 15 minutes, given the time it took us to create the material. And comparing that to the progress I was able to make in this last half hour, which was just spent painting. Might have been fun to save the piece. Here. I was gonna say it might have been fun to save the piece at the 15-minute mark of this sprint, the halfway through, but that's gone. We can't change the past. That time is gone. But there's pretty much exactly 10 minutes left on my sprint. So I'm still able to I was able to save the piece at 15 minutes of work, 35 minutes of work, and then at the end 45 minutes of work. So those will be some interesting processes to compare to. And by the way, what I did to save a new version really quickly, like you just saw, is Shift Control S, and then you put the plus icon. Plus it adds another number, and so it saves a new version of the file that way. So this is something that I like to do every now and then. It's good, to be able to go back to previous versions in case you realize that you've made some changes that you're not a fan of. Sometimes it can be nice to have previous versions to be able to go back to. But I also really like saving them just to be able to compare my progress, both for, studying, analyzing how much I got done and what does that teach me, just kind of analyzing your own progress. But the main reason I do it is just to feel good and feel proud and be able to see how much I did and like congratulate myself on that. Something that I'm noticing in myself as I film these real-time videos, which are very much just stream of consciousness thoughts, is I do congratulate myself quite a bit. And I'm mentioning that like as a really nice thing I think that I'm noticing about myself. I just thought if I should flip the canvas, so I'm going to take that as a sign that yes, I should flip the canvas. You know, I have spent a lot of time like practicing being nice to myself and having like positive self-talk, and you know, something that I've talked about a little bit, like not speaking negative, or like, you know, without like controlling your thoughts, because I also think that's like a very tricky place to be in. And I mean, I'm no therapist or anyone qualified to talk about this, but all that to say, I have been making an effort to practice more positive self-talk without like trying to force myself to like not do negative self-talk, or like without trying to control my thoughts, but just trying to notice like if I am entering into like negative self-talk, to make an effort to counter that without like beating myself up for having negative thoughts. Like I think it's a lot more risky to start trying to police your own thoughts, but at least if you do notice that, to counter that with positive thoughts. And I mean, take this for what it will. For what you will. I have absolutely zero credentials to be talking about this, so this is just my own lived experience. But another thing I was thinking about like today actually is I do journal every morning. I do like a stream of consciousness writing every single morning. I specifically do like morning pages, like author Julia Cameron talks about in The Artist's Way, which I did, is like an art course, like art creativity mindset program that I did do last year, which was like so transformative for me and really wonderful. And I still do the morning pages and I still adore them, but that has been a nice way to incorporate the practice of like practicing positive self-talk. And especially like if I notice negative stuff come up, that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's very human, but doing my best to counter it. So yeah, all that to say, what a tangent, that it's kind of really nice to just notice in my own like stream of consciousness talking when I do these videos, to notice myself just celebrating myself and my art, congratulating myself, being nice to myself. These are very unfiltered thoughts. So that's just really cool to see. I have been doing morning pages for like 2 years now. And this kind of, you know, trying to be nicer to myself for a long time now. So it's really cool to see. And I mean, it feels really, really nice to, you know, celebrate myself, my successes, my art. I do love what I make. I'm so proud of how far I've come, genuinely. So yeah, thanks for letting me share that a bit. This has not been the most tutorial focused, or like art process focused of these videos. Mostly just because I haven't really known what to say other than keep making strokes, just keep making strokes and layering them on top of one another with the methods that I've explained at the start of the video. There's really not much more to it than that I'm doing. I think with the last 5 minutes I will focus on finalizing like the piece as a whole. I'm gonna mostly let, I think anyways, the face and the main part of the frog, let it be. Work on these gradients, which I think are really nice. Just like encircling the frog in this really dark gradient. So something that I mean, I've talked about this a lot in these kinds of videos. I really think it's the best way to explain what I'm doing when like I'm just making strokes and I'm not really like, because I don't know any way to explain why I'm doing the strokes that I'm doing, why I'm drawing the strokes that I draw, except to say that the painting process like this, I really approach it with a mindset of troubleshooting, of fixing. That's pretty much what my brain is focused on when I do this. And so I'm basically looking constantly back and forth from my reference to my drawing and just paying attention to what stands out to me for the wrong reasons. Like, what am I like, oh, that is off compared to the reference image? Like what? So for example, I really want to work on the front leg now, because if I compare the two, then it's like, of course, that's totally off and the details are not at all there in my drawing. But it can also be a lot more subtle than that. Like, for example, I look, I'm doing this just to show you. So I'm looking here in my piece, and if I compare that to the reference, then I notice that the stomach is a lot more caved in on the reference than on my piece. And so I can make that change pretty easily. Sometimes I'll notice things like the colors, maybe a color, or like this edge here should be a lot softer in the reference image, whereas in my piece it's a very hard edge. Again, to show you that, I'm referring to this. Ooh. I'm referring to this here. It's a lot of a softer transition in my reference image. And so, you know, working on softening that. And so I, you know, it's just a process of that, of noticing what doesn't look right, whether that's an edge that's too hard or too soft, whether that's a color that's too saturated or too dull, or maybe just like it should be cooler, or it should be warmer, or it should be lighter, it should be darker, kind of thinking in terms of that. And thinking in terms of just like what is not working, what is wrong, and making those fixes. And I've talked about this course a lot. It's a course I took on Schoolism called Essentials of Realism, which was just such an amazing course to take. I'm really grateful for it, but for me that was a really helpful way to think about like the different elements that make up a painting, like values and colors and edges, to think of like they exist along a spectrum, like light to dark in terms of value, or hard to soft in terms of edges. And then of course, you know, it gets tricky then, because like color, there's not really a start to end for the colors. And so what this teacher talked about was thinking about colors along a spectrum of warm to cool colors. And so that's the way that I think about the colors in my piece when I'm having this mindset of looking for mistakes, of looking for things that I can fix. Does, you know, is like, for example, this yellow here, or this color here, it's a lot cooler compared to this red here. It can be warmed up using like a red or an orange or a yellow to make it, maybe not that one, to make it more accurate to the reference image. Wow, did I really just end this video with the most useful thing? Sorry about that. My timer is technically done, and I'm actually kind of really jazzed about this. Okay, so the video's officially over. I do just want to see. So now I'm gonna render all of these versions. So that I can compare my progress. So this last one was 45 minutes long. So I should probably explain what it is I just did. So in my compositing workspace, I have this node which turns the image black and white, which I use to check values usually. This was a quick enough piece that I didn't feel the need to turn it on or talk about it, but it is on by default. So with M, I've been just muting it so that it doesn't show up. And then I go into my, what is this, output properties, and I just change the percentage to 100% so that it renders at the highest resolution. Well, I mean, it could be higher, but like it runs at exactly 2550 by 2019 pixels, and then F12 to render, and then I save. This is my render result. I save it with image save as, and so yeah, I'm just naming them. This one was This one was 35 minutes. Right, yeah. It was 20 minutes into my second sprint, and the first sprint I had done only 15 minutes. I'm so excited to be able to scroll through these. Yes, to just feel good. Feel happy. Proud. Because I think, like, this is such an effective way to, you know, feel good about yourself, because even if the end product, like, is not exactly what you wanted, scrolling through progress pieces like this, like, you can still see progress, even if you're not at a point, you haven't ended up at a point where you're thrilled with the result. Like, I still think it's so satisfying to scroll through like this. And so, first 15 minutes, blocking in the big shapes, and also I totally got distracted rendering that face. Spent a long time on that, and then another 20 minutes later, we at least had almost the whole frog blocked out. All of the limbs we still, yeah, and then we hadn't really touched the face again, and then here, finished blocking in the frog just with that last hand, and rendered the face even more. So this is 45 minutes of work, 15 minutes to set up the material. I'm really happy about this. If I can, yeah. I must say, I really like gradient materials, and I think I'm personally way happier with how this has come out than the result of using just a material that was a solid stroke material, which is what this image was. There's nothing wrong with this image. That's not what I'm trying to say. I just really like the look of gradient materials. And I know I definitely had a lot more fun working on the gradient frog. I find the values are way more like impactful. Of course, we did really work on the background for this one. And I personally, this is all personal preference, but I find the look of the gradients and even the look of like the hard edges overlapping like here, I find all of that just really satisfying. So thank you for following along. This was so much fun. As always, thank you for all of your support. I really appreciate you. Please let me feedback. Yes, feedback is always super appreciated for these videos. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.